Now, phase 2 of the National Speed Limit Review process has commenced. Work has begun to facilitate the introduction of a 30km/h special speed limit in built-up and urban areas in County Clare. The government circular has indicated all bylaws are brought to the elected members for adoption by the 30th of October with an implementation date of the 31st of March next year. It's intended to propose a 30km/h speed limit in urban cores of towns where there's significant interaction with vulnerable road users and a greater concentration of economic activity and footfall. To get more on this, I'm joined on the line by the Ardent Crush of Fianna Fáil councillor and member of the Local Authorities Road Safety Working Group, Rachel Hartigan. Rachel, good morning to you.
Good morning, Alan. How are you?
Very well. I'm keen to hear more about what's happening in relation to this speed limit. So work underway to introduce the limit in parts of Clare. Can you tell us more about what's happening? And it's part of a national review. What's driving the move toward lower speed limits in urban areas?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing to say at a Clare County Council level is that we're at a very early stage in this, and just at the outset I want to make it clear that elected members haven't actually formally engaged yet or briefed yet. Nothing has come before us for a decision. So this really is the very beginning of a process rather than anything final. So what's being looked at the moment, and this is nationally, is 30km/h speed limits in the core areas of towns or built up urban areas. So you're looking at places with high footfall, shops, schools, where there's a lot of interaction between vehicles and pedestrians. And I know at a local authority level here in Clare at the moment, mapping is being prepared, and that will come then to the elected members for workshops and discussion, along with consultation with the Gardai, and then there should be some opportunities for public input as well. So again, nothing is decided, but I suppose this is coming from, we all know, anyone who has ever been on the canvas trail will know that one of the major issues that comes up, and I don't think it's unique to Clare, I think it's around right around the country, one of the major issues that comes up is road safety and pedestrian safety. So I think that's really the drive, and that's where this initiative is coming from.
Okay, so vulnerable road users like pedestrians, cyclists. I mentioned that 30km speed limit would be in certain areas, so are we talking about housing estates, those kind of areas being considered for these zones?
Yeah, so it's really anywhere that could be considered a built-up urban area. So I think that the roads team are working in consultation with the Gardai at the minute. Again, nothing has come before us as elected members just yet, so I couldn't say one way or the other whether there's particular areas that will be lowered. But it does make sense to lower the speeds in the right places. And what I'd be thinking, like you, is areas like very large built-up housing estates, busy town centres where you've got a lot of people crossing roads, you've got kids, you've got older people, a lot of footfall, because it is just a very different environment to the open road. And I think that we need to make some changes in the country just to allow for that. And it's certainly one of the biggest requests that I would get in, and you'd be familiar with my kind of home area, Alan, and we're quite close to the border of Limerick City. It is quite a built-up urban area. We don't have a town centre, but there are several large housing estates like Westbury, Shannonbanks, Carrickmead, my own housing estate in Keelgrove. So you wouldn't really be looking at speed limit reductions in town centres. In some areas of Clare, it could be areas like mine that are built up urban areas and large housing estates like that.
I suppose it's going to be quite some time before we see what comes in, but if we do see ultimately these 30km/h speed limit zones coming in by the 31st of March 2027, I guess the next key element will be enforcement and how any such new limits would be monitored and enforced, because it's all well and good designating a zone as 30km/h and putting the signs up, but actually getting people to adhere to them and respect them is an entirely different matter.
Yeah, definitely. And that is feedback that I would have had when the limits on some rural roads were reduced to 80 to 60. That is some of the feedback. Overall, a lot of the feedback that I've had since has been very positive. But I do understand why people would feel that way, because we have seen a bit of that already. When those rural limits did change in some areas, look, there wasn't full compliance, and I would say that there still isn't full compliance on all of our roads where those speed limit changes came into effect. And I think it is important to just say that plainly. annoyingly. Like that is the truth of it at the end of the day. And a lot of that does come down to enforcement, but there is driver responsibility there and driver behaviour there that comes into it too. At the same time, though, as I said, I've received plenty of positive feedback since those changes did come into force. Plenty of people have adjusted, and I think overall it was the right move. So I don't think the answer is to avoid introducing safer limits. I just think it's to make sure they're backed up properly so they actually work. And in particular, in the rural areas, it is harder for the Gardaí to enforce it because there isn't always safe places for them to, for example, put a speed van to make sure that people are adhering to those limits. But I definitely think with the more urban areas, when we see these reductions come in, the 50 down to the 30, I think it's a much easier, these are much easier areas for these new speed limits to be enforced, because I think naturally it's easier to have more of a Garda presence on these roads than numerous rural roads throughout the county.
Obviously, if they do ultimately come in, the vulnerable road users like pedestrians and cyclists, no doubt, will be happy. But I wonder what benefits it could bring, Rachel, not just in terms of safety, but also for local businesses and town centres.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of it. You know, it's really about matching the speed to the environment. So a busy town centre is just a very different space to a national road or a quiet rural stretch. So I think that bringing these speed limit reductions in is about balance, and I think that there will be positive feedback when these come in. It's something that people are asking for locally. People that get in touch with me regularly would be very welcoming of this initiative. So I think that there would be positive impacts on local businesses. It would just make our town centres and our built-up urban areas just more pedestrian friendly. And unfortunately, I think we've all seen examples in our own daily lives where this just isn't the case, where a lot of even town centres just don't feel particularly safe for pedestrians and cyclists and other road users that aren't just behind the wheel. And overall, I think that it will make the lives of drivers easier as well. You know, it's proven that lower speeds lead to less collisions, and even if in the unfortunate event that there would be a collision, we know that lower speeds stop it from being more serious. So I think there's benefits for everybody, and in particular for small businesses and for people just wanting to enjoy the built-up areas that we have in our county and our town centres and village centres in our county.
People listening will be, I'm sure, wondering, can they get involved in any way, or have their say as the plans develop?
Yeah, there should be a space for people to actually come in. There's normally a public consultation period. There was the last time with these processes. So, you know, at the moment, as I said, mapping is being prepared. That will come to elected members then for workshops and discussion, along with consultation with the Gardai, and then there should be opportunities for public input as well. So, you know, I think we're headed in a good direction with this, but it does have to be done properly, and that does mean engagement with councillors and the public, clear mapping, and crucially enforcement then. And I think as councillors, we will all have an important role to play during the consultation process once those briefings and workshops that we're going to have with the roads team in Clare County Council gets underway, because we are familiar with the roads in our areas. We are familiar with the roads where people would like to see speed limit reductions come into force. You know, that was important, especially for parts of my home patch during the reduction from 80 to 60 on rural roads. You know, I was immediately able to fire off 10 or 12 different roads where people have come to me asking for speed limit reductions already. So the councillors really have a crucial role to play in this, and definitely I'd be encouraging people, if there's a road that they know of that they would like the speed limit to be reduced from 50 to 30, if they think it could be of benefit to the wider area, I would definitely encourage them to get in touch with their local councillor, because we will have that important role to play in the consultation process.
Okay, we'll park that one there for the moment. Rachel, thanks very much for bringing us up to date with that story, and no doubt we'll be speaking to you about it again soon. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Alan. That's
Rachel Hartigan, the Ardnacrusher Fianna Fáil councillor, who is a member of the local authority's road safety working group.